On the agenda, Billish Park. Craig, you want to come up and tell us all about it?
Sure. Howdy.
Thanks for coming.
Sorry?
Thanks for coming.
You bet.
Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. Craig Thompson with Hanson Professional Services. As you can see, the sod placement is proceeding. We had a really good meeting yesterday with Marvin, with Jim, and I forgot the other gentleman that was there, Marvin.
Brian Housekener.
There you go. Had a good meeting with him. The contractor was there, myself, and the landscape architect that worked with us on it. Had a couple concerns, obviously, that we wanted to talk about, but just with regard to the sod and the placement and the timing of that, I think we were told that if Mother Nature acts perfectly, we got about 10 days, about 2 weeks or so. I'd like to give a little bit of fluff time for all of us to, on that, so maybe a couple, 3 weeks. So we're talking about middle October or so, the sod being completely placed. After that, we're not looking at too much longer of a delay after that, and the contractor will be placing down the pre-emergent, the herbicide, the first placement of that herbicide, which they were required to do within the contract. And so we're hoping within about 3 weeks or so, the park will be completely open, sod will be placed, and we'll be working out any issues with irrigation and whatnot. We haven't done a final walkthrough on all the irrigation sprinklers and everything as they've been placed in the sod, but we'll be doing that when the sod's finally placed. So a couple of the concerns that were brought up over the last couple of weeks, obviously from lots of folks, and we discussed it in the meeting yesterday, was some standing water on the sand volleyball court. A couple things we looked at. There was a filter fabric that was placed underneath the sand that was brought there and on the sides of the sand. That filter fabric does allow water to percolate through it. It was put there so that the type of sand that we imported, which was imported from Central Texas, that's used for all the volleyball, beach volleyball courts and professionally and even amateurly, so that sand doesn't necessarily migrate and mix with the sand that's out here on the island. And so that's why the fabric was there. Whether that fabric was holding back water, I personally think it was just a high water table, and quite honestly, we have some more sand to be brought to the site, and we talked to the contractor yesterday about that. That's going to be proceeding hopefully this week or next week. And so before we place that sand, I think we kind of all thought that it'd probably be a best precaution. Marvin, you can talk about it a little bit, but to put some holes down in through it as we put this sand back in there, just as a precaution. I don't really have a problem with those holes, that sand percolating through that too much, especially if those holes are spaced out a little bit, but that may help with some drainage being captured within that filter fabric. So that talks about the beach volleyball court itself. Again, there's going to be some more sand brought out there, and that's not complete yet at all. There was another item brought up about some grading baseball field, and we are requiring, the contracts and the plans do require positive drainage there from the center of that baseball field out. I was out there today doing some novice surveying with the level out there, and we do have some grading to do. I sent a note to the contractor identifying some grades that we'd like to meet in the center of that baseball field so that we do have some positive drainage. So we'll be working on some of that grading activity coming up within the next couple of weeks. And then there was a mention about even some ponding water in the playground. Now, we did not place any filter fabric underneath that or anything, and I just can only assume that with how saturated the soils were, with how much we were running those sprinklers for the sod, and it was completely saturated, believe me, if anybody stepped out there, it was completely saturated, which you need to be able to grow that sod, especially in the hot times. And then with the amount of rain we got, I just think, the groundwater table probably got so high. But we're looking at the volleyball court. Hopefully a few fixes with that and some more sand, and we move on. So, any questions from the board?
Questions?
On the new little playground area, there'd curb around it. It's
Right.
not letting the water flow.
Well, I mean,
Well-
that curb has been there
Right.
since they built it.
Right.
And it may not let the water flow necessarily to the side, but quite honestly, I think what you've seen, and there's, when you just get the amount of rains that you guys had out here, and we all had, and you get saturated conditions like we had. I mean, remember, we were running those sprinklers 24/7. We were running those sprinklers. So there was nowhere for water to go. I just think you had a water table that just rose so high, and I mean, I think it's gone back down. I was out at the playground earlier this week. We looked at it, no standing water there. I just think you're going to have some times out here on this island, guys, when you, and it happens in Aransas County, it happens in Flower Bluff, it happens in these sandy soil areas, that water table, when you get the amount of rain you get, it comes up. I mean, there are times you drive down Park Road 22 and there's water that's pushed out into the roadway in Park Road 22. It just, the groundwater table fluctuates significantly. When you get rains like that, it's going to affect those things. Our job is, my job is to make sure that we get that sand up to an elevation so that it's above that elevation. And I went out and looked at it. We looked at it yesterday. We discussed it yesterday. There's some more sand that needs to be brought by the contractor. But as far as the curb, it's been there. I just think your groundwater table got so high. I don't even think if that curb was gone that it would have really gone anywhere.
Okay, thank you. I was gonna suggest we cut some holes in it.
Well, a concrete curb along the playground may not be the
Probably not.
right. I think there was some sidebar discussion, not part of our contract or anything yesterday, and I think your leadership's looking at that.
Okay, thank you. Thanks.
Didn't we discuss ways to remedy that, either remove the concrete curb entirely or find some rubber bumpers to put around it, that kind of thing?
Right, yeah, absolutely. I think you mentioned those two items. Removing it completely, I'm not sure that's necessarily the worst of things, but some sort of edging there may be necessary. I'm not sure if it's necessary. I don't think you're going to get the mulch migrating into the sand. You may get some sand migrating into the mulch, but I don't know if that edging is necessary there. If you were to keep it like you have it, then yeah, I would suggest something. I mean, I think we discussed something with a softer edge than concrete.
Jim, didn't we begin to look into that? Have you started looking at rubber baby bunkers or something?
Yes, we started looking at either putting rubber around the curb, or as Marvin said, perhaps removing the curb and putting something that is much softer and more pliable in its place. So those are two options that we've begun to examine because the most dangerous thing, of course, is if somebody falls and gets hurt. And for an association this size, liability must always be at the forefront of everyone's thinking. And so the more we can do to reduce potential liability, the better off we are, and obviously ultimately that affects the insurance that the association pays for these types of things. So, yes.
Brent?
So Daryl just kindly reminded me, Jim, this is your first board meeting, and we failed to introduce you.
Well, I'm sorry, I was waiting for his report to bring him out. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Jim Smocker, new executive director.
Starry, starry night.